Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we are continuing journal collection number 48, dating from the year 1857 when Emerson was 54 years old. We are up to August 2nd of that year, and I will read that entry. Yesterday with Ellery at Flint's Pond. The pond was in its summer glory, the chestnuts in flower, two fishermen in a boat, thunder tops in the sky, and the whole picture a study of all the secrets of landscape. A place for everything and everything in its place. No waste and no want. Each minds his own part, and none overdo and none interfere. These and the like rules of good householding are kept here in nature. The great afternoon spins like fireworks, or festival of the gods, with a tranquil exultation, as of a boy that has launched his first boat or his first balloon, and the experiment succeeds. Ellery said, "You must come up here to see it. It can never be imagined. You must come here to see it, or you have lost your day." "'Tis an objection," I said, "to astronomy, that you light your candle at both ends. After you have got through the day, and 'tis necessary you should give attention to the business of sleeping, all hands are called. Here come Canopus, Aldebaran, and all the stars, and you are to begin again." The woods were in their best, high grown again, and flecked with spots of pure sunshine everywhere. Paths for Una and her lamb, say better, fit for the stoutest farmers and the greatest scholars. Inspired, we forget our books to see the landscape's royal looks. Joseph Paulus is the hunter who went with Henry Thoreau and Edward Hoare. An Indian has his knowledge for use, and it only appears in use. Most white men that we know have theirs for talking purposes. The Indian can call a muskrat swimming in the river to the side where he stands, and make him land. "See, muskrat, me go talk with him." He can go into the lakes and be paddled round and round 10 or 20 times, and then can go off in straight line, to camp or to Old Town. White man cannot. An Indian can't tell how he does it. He can give you a new tea every night, and a soup every day. Lily soup, hemlock tea, tea from the snowberry, Chiogenes hispidula is best. He can cut a string from spruce root as you cannot. Truth. Truth, says Buchner, hides an inner attraction in itself, beside which all other respects easily vanish. Apud Frauenstadt. Quote, "By royal decree we prohibit the gods to work any miracle near these sods." I have quite forgotten what garden this compliment to religion was paid. September 4th. Yesterday with Henry at the Eastabrook farm and Ebba Hubbard's swamp to see the yellow birches, which grow larger than I have seen them elsewhere. The biggest measured at 5 feet from the ground, 10 feet 5 inches in circumference. We found bass, thorn tree, fever bush abounding, a huge ivy running up the base round a tree to the height of 20 or 30 feet like a hairy snake, Osmunda regalis, white mint, pennyroyal, calamint, Aster corymbosa, the bayberry, Ephicorpia, Botricium onoclea, brake tripartite. A valuable walk through the savage, fertile, houseless land where we saw pigeons and marsh hawks, and ere we left it, the mists which denote the haunt of the elder gods were rising. Henry said of the railroad whistle that nature had made up her mind not to hear it. She knew better than to wake up and, "The fact that you tell is of no value, 'tis only the impression." Curious that the best thing I saw in Mammoth Cave was an illusion. But I have had many experiences like that, and many men have. Our conversation with nature is not quite what it seems. The sunset glories are not quite so real as childhood thought them, and the part that our organization plays in them is too large. The same subjectiveness interferes everywhere. Dr. Solger, when the event is past and remote, How insignificant the great is compared with the piquancy of the present. The professor interrogates Annie in the class about Odoacer and Alaric. How we failed to be Catholics. The other lesson we got from the lecture was the pathetic one, that the poor Goths or Germans must needs come into the empire when Valens was an Arian, and therefore all Goths and Germans must be Arians, and not the orthodox, Catholic prevailing Athanasian creed. In this first germ one sees us nailed to the north wall of opposition, and foreordained to be pale Protestants, Unitarians, Free Soilers, abolitionists. What balks all language is, the broad, radiating, immensely distributive action of nature or spirit. If it were linear, if it were successive, step by step, jet after jet, like our small human agency, we could follow it with language, but it mocks us. Greatness. Every human being whom history selects is some child of fate, full of fate, who did what he did by this strong arm, as the wood chopper, by using the force of gravity, lets the planet chop his stick. So these men perceived each that he had inherited some trick of nature, a voice, or a face, or a sympathy, or a brutish courage, or skill, some fascination which prevailed with his fellows, and he gladly threw himself on this, seeing how much it served him, though all this belonged to the kingdom of fate, and not to the sphere of the souls. Maximum and minimum. The doses of heaven are homeopathic. How little it is that differences the man from the woman, the animal from the plant, the most like from the most unlike things. The sun is as much a creature of fate as any worm which his heat engenders in the mud of earth. Large and small are nothing. Given a vesicle, you have the cosmos. Quote, for the living out of doors and simple fare and gymnastic exercises and the morals of companions produce the greatest effect in the way of virtue and of vice. Plato, Timaeus. Here again is the circumstance, is fate so potent, or shall I say, here the unity of things, intimating that the moral is the highest chemistry. Put the atoms all right, in their best order, and you get the unsophisticated countryman, body and mind in equal health. The crystallization is not interfered with nor hastened, and the perfect diamond results. Surfaces. Good writing sips the foam of the cup. There are infinite degrees of delicacy in the use of the hands, and good workmen are so distinguished from laborers, and good horsemen from rude riders, and people of elegant manners from the vulgar. In writing it is always at the surface, and can chip off a scale where a coarser hand and eye find only solid wall. Determination of blood is all one with intrinsic value. If a man is set on collecting diamonds, or Arabian horses, or an arboretum, or a particular piece of land, or a telescope, his heat makes the value. We read the Orientals, but remain Occidental. The fewest men receive anything from their studies. The abolitionists are not better men for their zeal. They have neither abolished slavery in Carolina nor in me, if they cannot break any fetter of mine. I cannot hope they will of any Negro. They are bitter, sterile people whom I flee from, to the unpretentious whom they disparage. I see them to be logically right, but... And the editor says the rest is torn out. The eye is final. What it tells is the last stroke of nature. Beyond color we cannot go. Gauss, I believe it is, who writes books that nobody can understand but himself, and himself only in his best hours. And Pierce and Gould and others in Cambridge are piqued with the like ambition. But I fancy more the wit of Defoe and Cervantes and Montaigne who make deep and abstruse things popular. Henry avoids commonplace and talks birch bark to all comers, reduces them all to the same insignificance. The Atlantic Monthly. A journal is an assuming to guide the age. Very proper and necessary to be done, and good news that it shall be so. But this journal, is this it? Has Apollo spoken? In this the sentiment of freedom is the sting which all feel in common, a northern sentiment the only tie, and the manifest conveniency of having a good vent for such wares as scholars have. There is this discrepancy in the nature of the thing. Each of the contributors is content that the thing be to the largest aims. But when he is asked for his contribution, he considers where his strength lies. He has certain experiences which have impressed him lately, and which he can combine, but no choice, or a very narrow choice among such, and the best the editor can do is to see that nothing goes into the book but important pieces. Every chapter must record of real experiences. It suffices that it be weighty. It matters not whether 'tis upon religion, or balloons, or knee buckles, so only that there is nothing fantastic or factitious in the subject and writing. Great scope and illumination ought to be in the editor to draw from the best in the land, and to defy the public if he is only sure himself that the piece has worth and is right. Publics are very placable, and will soon find out when they have a master. The value of money capital is to be able to hold out for a few months, and go on printing until the discerning minority of the public have found out that the book is right, and must humbly and thankfully accept it, and abandon themselves to this direction, too happy that they have got something good and wise to admire and obey. Alcott makes his large demand on the lecture, that it is the university of the people, and 'tis time they should know at the end of the season what their professors have taught this winter, and it should be gathered by a good reporter in a book what Beecher, Whipple, Parker, Bellows, King, Soldier, and Emerson have taught. But the lecturer was not allowed to be quite simple, as if he were on his conscience to unfold himself to a college class. But he knew his audience and used the adulatory and confectionary arts, according to Plato, to keep them in their seats. He treats them as children, and mercantile libraries and lyceums will all vote, if the question be virtually put to them. We prefer to be entertained, nay, we must be entertained. My friend has magnificent views, and looks habitually to the government of the country, of the state, of nature, nothing less. His natural attitude explains Plato. When has Plato found a genial critic? No, always a silly village wondering what he could be at. What he said about women? Did he mean Athens, or Hippias, or the 30? None of it at all, but just what you mean, when you come to the morning mountains and say, the soul made the world and should govern it, and the right radiancy of the soul from the center outward making nature and distributing it to the care of wise souls would be thus and thus. Here is my sketch, speaking really or scientifically, and not in your conventional gabble. Alcott thinks Socrates would have not known his own remark when Plato repeated it. What an obstinate illusion is that which in the youth gives respect to the old. Dreams. I owe real knowledge and even alarming hints to dreams, and wonder to see people extracting emptiness from mahogany tables when there is vaticination in their dreams. For the soul in dreams has a subtle synthetic power which it will not exert under the sharp eyes of day. It does not like to be watched or looked upon, and flies to real twilights as the rappers do in their wretched mummeries. If in dreams you see loose and luxurious pictures, an inevitable tide drags in the sequel of cruelty and malignity. If you swallow the devil's bait, you will have a horizon full of dragons shortly. When I higgled for my dime and half-dime in the dream and lost, the parrots on the chimney tops and church pinnacles scoffed at me. Ho, ho. The shooting complexion, like the cobra de capello and scorpion, grows in the south. It has no wisdom, no capacity of improvement. It looks in every landscape only for partridges, in every society for duels. And as it threatens life, all wise men, brave or peaceable, run away from the spider-man as they run away from the black spider. For life to them is real and rich, and not to be risked on any curiosity as to whether spider or spider-man can bite a poisonous wound. With such a nation, or a nation with the predominance of this complexion, war is the safest terms. That marks them, and if they cross the lines, they can be dealt with as all fanged animals must be. Is there no check to this class of privileged thieves that infest our politics? We mark and lock up the petty thief, or we raise the hue and cry in the street, and do not hesitate to draw our revolvers out of the box when one is in the house. But here are certain well-dressed, well-bred fellows, infinitely more mischievous, who get into the government and rob without stint, and without disgrace. They do it with a high hand, and by the device of having a party to whitewash them, to abet the act and lie and vote for them. And often each of the larger rogues has his newspaper called his organ to say that it was not stealing, this which he did, that if he was stealing, it was you who stole it and not he. I took such pains not to keep my money in the house, but to put it out of the reach of burglars by buying stock, and had no guess that I was putting it into the hands of these very burglars, now grown wiser and standing dressed as railway directors. Wisdom has its root in goodness, and not goodness in its root in wisdom. A thought is embosomed in a sentiment, which broadens indefinitely around it, and the attempt to detach and blazon the thought by itself is like a show of cut flowers. Wonders of Arnica. I must surely see the plant growing. Where's Henry? If Louis XVI had only in his pocket a phial of arnica, Father Edgeworth could have attached his falling head to his body, and with a little arnica made all whole again, and altered the fate of Europe. It was a sublime-sounding fact which we used to hear of Egyptian temples, that the foundation stones showed carvings on their undersides, showing that, old as they were ruins of an older civilization, and I found in Sicily that the church in Syracuse was an antique temple of Diana, but that was a mushroom to the Egyptian. But geology will show that first primeval carved stone to have been a stratum precipitated and crystallized in what far eons of uncounted time. Neither then were the particles and atoms new and raw, but mellowed and charred and decomposed from older mixtures, when, and where to each their youth. A particle of azote or carbon is and remains azote and carbon. Quote, nothing can in the least wear it. Well, like the arugo, sacred rust and smell of an immeasurable antiquity, is on all with which we deal, or of which we are. Quote, and the ruby bricks of the human blood have of old been wicks in God's halls that stood, as Wilkinson huskily sings. Do we suppose it is newer with our thoughts? Do they come to us for the first time? These wandering stars and sparks of truth that shone for eternity and casually beam this instant on us? The memory is made up of older memories. The blaze of genius owes its depth to our delighted recognition of the truth as something older than the oldest, and which we know aforetime, whether in the body or out of the body we cannot tell. God knoweth. I recalled today for the first time for many years old lines of Moore that once delighted me. The Song of the Peri and his lines about Campbell, I think, quote, true bard and simple as the race of heaven-born poets always are, when stooping from their starry place their children near, though gods afar. Generalization. The studies of Cuvier showed that the classification of animals must be based on organs, but Bichat showed that the organs depended on the tissues, and so undermined Cuvier's system. But newer inquirers, Schwann, showed that tissues depended on cellular structure, and so undermined Bichat. And when the microscope is improved, we shall have the cells analyzed, and all will be electricity or somewhat else. Success. I like the success of George Stephenson and Columbus, well won, hard earned by 50 years of work, a sleepless eye, and an invincible will. Do you not know that, quote, wisdom is not found in the hands of those who live at their ease? Job. Instinct. The girl deserts the parlor to hear the delightful naivete of the Milesians in the kitchen. The boy runs gladly from the tutors and parents to the uproarious life he finds in the market and the wharf. The college is not so wise as the shop, nor the quarter-deck as the forecastle. If Bowen or Sir William Hamilton were to lecture, and at the same hour in which George Melvin or Joe Polis, the Bangor Indian, would tell us what they knew of owls or of muskrats, Sir William would be deserted. 'Twas a Pythagorean rule, don't sail on the ground. When a man defines his position, it must be his organic position, that which he must occupy. Then it is interesting, as every piece of natural history is, but not his expedient or selected position, for fraud and cunning are essentially uninteresting. If a true metaphysician should come, he would accompany each man through his own, the student's mind, and would point at his treasure crypt, and at that, indicating immense wealth lying here and there, which the student would joyfully perceive and pass on from hall to hall, from recess to recess, ever to more interior and causal forces, being minded to come over again on the same tracks by himself at future leisure, and explore more nearly the treasures now only verified. But such as we now call metaphysicians, the Locks and Reeds and Stewarts, etc., are no more than the valets de place and custody who leads travelers through the curiosities of Rome or Verona, and say over by rote the legends that have been repeated from father to son. And then there's some Italian phrases that are untranslated. Why does the name of a chapter, quote, on memory, end quote, shoot a little chill to the mind of each auditor? There are few facts known on the subject of memory. In the minds of most men it is nothing but a calendar on such a day. Quote, you may perish out of your senses, but not out of your memory and imagination, end quote, said Alcott. But he says nothing satisfactory about either of these two immense powers. All that is good as his ranking them so high. I tell him that no people have imagination. 'Tis the rarest gift. Imagination is the nomination of the causal facts, the laws of the soul by the physical facts. All physical facts are words for spiritual facts, and imagination, by naming them, is the interpreter showing us the unity of the world. Most men are cowed by society, and say good things to you in private, but will not stand to them in public. I listen to every prompting of honor, believing that it can deliver itself through all the maze of relations to the end of nature. Nature does not like criticism. There is much that a wise man would not know. Naivete. Uses of nature, to be sure. Why, this is foremost. What we value, all we value, is the natural, or peculiar quality of each man, and in a large, healthy individual, this is the antagonist of gravitation, vegetation, chemistry, nay, of matter itself, and as good at last as they. This is the saliency, the principle of levity, the sol volatile, which is the balance or offset to the mountains and masses. This is forever a surprise and engaging, and a man is therefore and thus wonderful and lovely. Now Homer, Shakespeare, Burns, Scott, Voltaire, Rabelais, Montaigne, Hafitz have these spirits or intuitions, and are magnetic or interesting to all men. We are curious about them, can't be satisfied with the watching the primal springs and their movements, wish to know their law if we could. Well, every man has the like potency in him, more or less. This wit is related to the secret of the world, to the primitive power, the incessant creation. It is in harmony with gravity and the orbit of the stars, and the growth of grass and the angles of crystals. There is no luck or choice about it, but law in it from first to last. It is the next finer ascent or metamorphosis of gravity, chemistry, vegetation, animal life, the same thing on the next higher plane, as the morale is a still higher ascent or metamorphosis and kindred to it. But the essence of it is that it be native and intuitive. All facts in nature interest us, because they are deep and not accidental, especially not tampered with, adulterated, doctored, or betraying any lower will, any quackery or falsehood. Animals, Indians, farmers, children, interest us so. But this native force has most unequal temperament. In the vast mass it sleep and is hard to awaken. In Rabelais, Homer, and Shakespeare and Cervantes it is fortunately free and escapes in fine jets, illuminating the time and place where they are. It subsists in the whole population, but is more or less torpid. Then the problem was to free it. It was found that new aspects of nature, mountains, forests, sea air, change of place, cities, and travel had a good effect of disengaging this volatile principle. And the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean have this medical value in the history of man. But it was early discovered that the low will or selfishness of the individual could be disengaged at the same time and blend with the spirit or genius, and instantly rots it. Better have none. Cities are sure to corrupt it. Editor's note. Scattered along the next pages of the journal are trial verses, some of which are found in Vol.9 Samkite, the Song of Nature, Walden in the Poems. But oft at home mid tasks I heed how wears the day. We must not halt while fiercely speed the spans of life away. But here amid the hills sublime, or down the oaken glade, oh, what have I to do with time? For this the day was made. Nature. What wealth of mornings in her year, and planets in her sky! She chose the best thy heart to cheer, thy beauty to supply. Now younger lovers find the stream, the willow and the vine, but aye to me the happiest seem to draw the dregs of wine. The air is wise, the wind thinks well, and all through which it blows, if plant or brain, if egg or cell, or bird or biped knows. Here the great planter plants of fruitful worlds the grain, and with a million spells enchants the souls that walk in pain. Here are the types of all he made, the grace that gladly wins, words for all thoughts that can be said, and youth which aye begins. Here works the craft that wove the robe of sky-embroidered stars, that carved the cockle, cast the globe, scooped seas, and set their bars. He to the gentle virgin bold, or humble careless boy, tells what cannot with words be told, but molded into joy. Whatever we study in nature, 'tis always found to be the study of man. That gives the edge to the inquiry. If you could once show an independency and forwardness in nature, we should never care for it more. But this study has its stern, purifying, corrective effect. Man's egotism will not be found there. Man's crime or folly will be filtered out. 'Tis only moral and rational man that nature subserves. Fontenelle said, quote, when a learned man speaks to instruct other men, and exactly in that line of instruction they wish to acquire, he does them a favor. But if he speaks only to show off his own learning, they do him a favor in listening. Arago, page 360. Quote, the 12th century is an aurora, the 14th a sunset, said Fariel. Quote, there is a certain village where the whole population reproduces still at the present day the features of the ancient signors. I speak of the Marabouts. Michelet, Renaissance. Quote, God the Father during 15 centuries has no altar. Pos. The miracle in Safford and in Corinne or Sorella is only the acceleration of the process which take place slower in the writer. And we say in relating to anybody's bon mot that he replied instantly so and so, whilst l'esprit d'escalier, though it were better, is not much valued. Reverend Mr. Stone of Bolton thought Bacon monotonous, and 'tis certain that Shakespeare is Murionus. Bacon is worldly. Shakespeare defies the world even, through Falstaff and the clown, with his spiritual fun. Miscellany is as bad as drunkenness. The saddest fact I know under the category of compensation is that when we look at an object, we turn away from every other object in the universe. Answer: the redress is that we find every other object in that. My philosophy holds to a few laws. 1. Identity, whence comes the fact that metaphysical faculties and facts are the transcendency of physical. 2. Flowing or transition or shooting the gulf, the perpetual striving to ascend to a higher platform, the same thing in a new and higher form. High criticism. You must draw your rule from the genius of that which you do, and not from by-ends. Don't make a novel to establish a principle of political economy. You will spoil both. Don't set out to teach theism from your natural history like Paley and Agassiz. You spoil both. Few stars, few thoughts. They say that though the stars appear so numberless, you cannot count more than 1,000. Well, there are few thoughts. Count the books, and you would think there was an immense wealth. But any expert knows that there are few thoughts which have emerged in this time. Shut him up in a closet, and he could soon tell them all. They are quoted, contradicted, modified, but the amount remains computably small. Quote-unquote masterly inactivity, quote-unquote wise passiveness. See how much has been made of that feather stolen from the plume of Carlyle by Calhoun and others. The ballads got their excellence as perhaps Homer and the Cid did by being conventional stories, conventionally treated, with conventional rhymes and tunes and images, done over and over until at last all the strokes were right and the faults were thrown away. Thus Logan got his, quote, "They sought him east, they sought him west," end quote, etc. Somebody even borrowed, and then there is a Latin phrase which is untranslated. See Child's Ballads, Volume 2, The Drowned Lovers. Society is very swift in its instincts, and if you do not belong to it, resists and sneers at you, or quietly drops you. The reason why the Greek mythology obtains to this day is that it is more Catholic than any other. If men should take off their clothes, I think the aristocracy would not be less but more pronounced than now. If men were as thick as snowflakes, millions of flakes, but there is still but one snowflake, but every man is a door to a single deep secret. The ancients, to make a god, added to the human figure some brutal exaggeration, as the leonine head of Jove, the bull neck of Hercules, and Michelangelo added horns to give mysterious strength to the head of Moses. So Webster, impressed by his superb animality, and was strong as nature, though weak in character. His understanding and his demonstrative talents were invigorated from these low sources, but he had vulgar ambition, and his power was only that of a lawyer, and it perished utterly even before his death. What is called his fame only marks the imbecility of those who invoke it. No, he was a skilful statesman and a great orator. R.W.E. It says this footnote was added later by the editor. Sentiment is always color, as thought is form. When I talked with Goodson on a Sunday morning in Cincinnati of Catholic churches, how warm and rich and sufficient was the hour in conversation, as the colors of the sunset, whilst we gaze, make the life so great. But now no memory remains of conversation or sunset. But remember the high value of sentiment to deepen or fix the thought, as when Wordsworth told me that a thought born and united to a sentiment was, then there's untranslated Greek words, or as I wrote it elsewhere, we never attain a perfect sincerity in our speech unless we feel a degree of tenderness. October 14th. The New York and Boston banks suspended specie payment, and, as usual in hard times, there are all sorts of petty and local reasons given for the pressure, but none that explain it to me. I suppose the reasons are not of yesterday or today. that the same danger has often approached and been avoided or postponed. 'Tis like the destruction of St. Petersburg, which was threatened by coal, which may come whenever a great freshet in the Neva shall coincide with the long prevalence of northwest wind. 'Tis like the jam which the ice or the logs make in our rivers. There is ample room for all the ice and all the logs to go downstream, was and is and shall be. But by unfavorable circumstances they are heaped together in a deadlock so as to dam them up the backwater till it accumulates to a deluge, and burst at last, carrying bridges, houses, and half-towns to destruction. But I take it as an inevitable incident to this money of civilization. Paper money is a wonderful convenience which builds up cities and nations, but it has this danger in it, like a camphine lamp or a steam boiler, it will sometimes explode. So excellent a tool we cannot spare, but must take it with risks. We know the dangers of the railroad, but we prefer it with its dangers to the old coach, and we must not forego the high civility of paper in credit, though once in 20 years it breaks the banks and puts all exchange and traffic at a stand. The financial panic has the value of a test. Nobody knows how far each of these bankers and traders blows up his little air ball on what infinitely small supply of soap and water. They all float in the air like as balloons or planets, if you will, until they strike one another or any house. But this panic is a severer examiner than any committee of bank commissioners to find out how much specie all this paper represents and how much real value. The imagination gives all the value to the day. If we walk, if we work, if we talk, it is how many strokes vibrate on the mystic string. But 'tis the north wind that thinks, and whatever it blows through, is it pinewood or biped, thinks rightfully and beautifully. 'Tis the receptivity that is rare. This is the end of Journal Collection number 48, dating from the year 1857, when the author was 54 years old. Thank you for listening.